The United States and the Soviet Union were now enemies and watched each other closely. After the failure of the American landings on the Bay of Pigs in Cuba, Khrushchev became increasingly more provocative. On the 14th of October, American planes spotted missile launch pads on Cuba. Kennedy decided on a blockade and prepared to attack by air.
All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, were they found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back.
The world was on the brink of war. On the 22nd of October, Khrushchev withdrew the missiles. The red telephone installed in both the White House and the Kremlin came to symbolize the need for understanding between the two superpowers condemned to be partners. During this period, the New York City Ballet arrived in Moscow for a 5-week tour. Deeply and violently anti-communist, Balanchine had always vowed that he would never return to Russia. However, he had had to concede to the entreaties of the State Department, which was trying to build new American-Soviet relationships, and had sent him as a cultural ambassador to the Soviet Union. For the first time in 38 years, Balanchine revisited his country, a country where art remained under the iron fist of ideology, Soviet social realism. The famous thaw of the Khrushchev years had not yet reached the field of choreography. The Soviet Union knew of only one form of ballet, the narrative ballet, which tells a story and exalts emotion. It lent itself more easily to the dogma required by the party. When Balanchine and his company arrived in Moscow, two great Soviet artists were dancing opposite each other in the fountain of Bakshy-Sarai, Maya Plisitskaya and Galina Ulanova. Balanchine was opposed to narrative ballet. There was no need for story. It was the dance itself which was the plot. The abstract beauty of Balanchine's works may have seemed gratuitous in the eyes of certain officials, but the dancers were seduced by it, and the dancers were excellent. The Russian school had never compromised its quality in the face of ideological instruction. What would have become of Balanchine if he had stayed in the Soviet Union? And what had become of the innovators of the 20s, Balanchine's teachers? Leonid Lopukov, who had lost his directorship of the Bolshoi under Stalin, had had to renounce abstract ballet. Instead, he concentrated his energy on the folk traditions in which he was an expert. Kasyan Golozovsky, whose futurist ballets had so delighted Balanchine, would direct his talent towards choreographic miniatures.
Ну вот я говорил, что экспериментировать нам было очень все-таки трудно, потому что за нами следили, как будто мы делаем какой-то грех, совершаем большой. И я переселился в теперешний славянский базар. Там нам дали помещение, и там вот я производил свои эксперименты.
As for Leonid Lavrovsky, companion and fellow student of Balanchine at the Mariinsky, he had become a Soviet official choreographer. We owe to him one of the best Soviet dance dramas, Romeo and Juliet, choreographed to the music of Prokofiev. Balanchine returned several times to Russia, and gradually the master of abstract ballet won over his country.
What is abstract? You see, I say it's concrete, it's not abstract. They mean storyless, but they have to could be a meaning in it. You see, the people that meet, that one first gives the hand and the girl embraces, it's already has a meaning in it. See?
Balanchine had allied himself from 1948 with a young choreographer whose name would become famous through the success of West Side Story, Jerome Robbins.
Well, first of all, of course, I look for a very good, strong classic ballet technique as a foundation. And after that, I look for versatility, and that besides having that accomplished, they can dance in a number of styles. I look for a directness and a simpleness of manner, an economy of movement, so that there's no she or phony mannerisms of false personalities applied to it.
Robbins' beginnings were with the American Ballet Theater, the second great pillar of classical ballet in America, where the psychological ballet was the dominant form, and the works of Anthony Tudor in particular. Wherever they came from, and whatever their sensibility, all the great choreographers of the period acknowledged Balanchine. Public esteem for abstract dance grew worldwide. Even the most traditional of companies incorporated abstraction into their repertoires. In England, in 1965, Frederick Ashton choreographed monotones for the Royal Ballet. the descendants of Balanchine in New York were two iconoclastic Americans, Carol Armitage and William Forsythe. Armitage retained the vocabulary and the use of point shoes from the classical technique, and from her experience with Cunningham, she kept the free use of space.
New York has had quite an influence on the work I do, first of all because New York is a place where the ideas about art are mostly circulating, and it's where there are a lot of questions asked. I began dancing purely by chance because one of the women from New York City Ballet moved to my hometown. She opened a dance studio, and all the mothers of the town decided that their daughters should go there to get grace. I danced for 5 years for the Merce Cunningham Dance Company, and for the first 2 years I worked very hard to learn this new way of moving, but then, punk. Ready to do virtuoso dancing again. I began making movement that was extreme, huge, precarious, off balance, angular, fast, full of momentum. It was completely articulate and clear on the one hand while being flung and wild on the other at the same time.
William Forsythe now works in Germany. However, he is an American. He arouses such passion that some speak of him as a contemporary Balanchine.
I went to a high school in Long Island outside of New York, and I played rock and roll music every day on the radio, and I danced with the refrigerator, in the kitchen. And I watched television and I watched Fred Astaire on TV all the time.
Forsyth was born on Long Island. His father was an advertising executive. The world of his childhood was one of images, commercials, and television. He received a classical training at the school of the Joffrey Ballet, where most of the teachers were former Balanchine dancers.
From Balanchine, I would like to have his legibility.
Forsyth has never ceased to work with classical material. In Germany, he has become interested in the Laban system. Its cornerstone is the kinesphere, the circular space around the dancer delineated by the extended limbs of the body. This way, Laban multiplied the possibilities for movement, but the dancer remained centered. Forsyth has burst through the Laban sphere by imagining potential points of departure from anywhere in the body, the left ear or the right elbow.
What you perceive to be three-dimensional, you can also translate within yourself. I don't know where he's going to go. Yeah? So you just go like that. Okay. Boom, 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 boom. See? Are working on materializing forms that manifest themselves within the dancers' minds according to things which they know. Okay.
What interests him is the moment of the articulation of movement, the destabilization, the decentering. His dance explodes form in order to reveal movements normally obscured. His work is close to a trend in architecture, known as deconstructivism, which also exposes the details normally concealed. Forsyth himself readily quotes the architect Liebeskind.
The violent archaeological traces of significance in Berlin have been taken up here in this project and disclosed in a way which architecture normally hides. For example, I have chosen to intersect the structure of the building, which is a linear structure, with the linear structure of the old north-south Speer axis, which, as you know, went to the very center of the power of the Reich, and to expose this axis by actually opening it as a public space and then having the actual architecture intervention crossing that axis and blocking the development of the north-south axis. The main strategy in this problem is not to look at the Berlin of the block structure, but really look across the wall.
Faced with constructivism, a utopian architecture which imagined a new city for a new mankind, deconstructivism is a critique of architecture, questioning its own history in order to dismantle the steps taken towards a utopia whose flaws now seem self-evident.
I don't look with nostalgia at modernism as being the prototype of what is happening today. Quite on the contrary, I see it as a very informative and key dimension. And certainly my own work and those of many others who practice today does not have the utopian connotations, does not have the notion of the perfect world, rather accepts what architecture tradition has accepted, the imperfection, the fact that architecture is practiced in a world which is already lost.
Forsyth gathers material for his dances from everywhere and anywhere. The journey his teacher Balanchine made, he needed to make in reverse. From the United States of America to the old world of Europe to the Frankfurt Ballet.
And what you think you see, you think you got your sign. When you got your see, you saw, you thought you think, but what you think you saw, you thought you think you see, you think you thought you think you see. And what you think you see, you think you got your sign. When you got your see, you saw, you thought you think, but what you think you saw, you thought you think you see, you see. Every time I step inside, I remember what I always say. And every time I step outside, I forget what I never said. Every time. Every time I step inside, I remember what I always hear. And every time I step outside, I forget what I never thought. Every time I step inside, I remember what I always do. And every time I step outside, I forget what I never think. Every time I step inside, I remember what I always say. And every time I step outside, I forget what I never thought.
I feel like I'm sort of floating around the world. I don't feel like I have roots. That's strange, yeah.
Цим